In Spanish, we call it Germany, but they call themselves Deutschland. We use the name Finland, but in Finnish, it's called Suomi. Goku comes from Japan, but Master Toriyama called his country Nippon Koko. Why do we in Spanish and several Western languages decide to rename so many countries? I'm El Mapa de Sebas, and I wouldn't want to be called Muhammad Ali in another country, even if people sometimes mistake me for being Arab. Curious why place names differ so much between countries? Okay, just stay until the video ends. Germany is the most populated country in Europe and has centuries of history forged since the Middle Ages. During ancient times, they were divided into various tribes east of the Rhine River, the Cherusci, Bructeri, and Marcomanni, and our rivals, the Alemanni, whose name comes from the Germanic word for German, or all men. During the Carolingian era, the descendants of the Alemanni settled along the routes to southern Europe, which made them more visible to medieval Spaniards and French. That's why in Spanish, Portuguese, and French, we started calling all Germanic people Germans. This last name, by the way, comes from the Romans, who called the present-day lands of Germany the Roman province of Germania. That's why in other languages like English or Italian, they use Germany or Germania. However, Thomas Müller and Michael Schumacher called their country Deutschland. This word comes from Old High German Gotis, which means of the people, used to distinguish the Germanic vernacular language from Latin, spoken by the Roman invaders during the Middle Ages. A word that is no longer used in modern German, but left its legacy in the name of the country Deutschland, the land of the people. Soccer fans are amazed at how such a small and young country managed to become the runner-up in the World Cup. History geeks like me are more curious to know why it's called Vasca. It turns out that the name isn't actually as different as we think. The word Croatia comes from the medieval Latin Croatia, derived from the ethnonym Croat, which in turn comes from the Slavic word Hrvat, the name that Croatians themselves used to refer to themselves. In Western languages, both Germanic and Romance, the initial Slavic R was difficult to pronounce, so it was phonetically transformed over time. The exact origin of Arbat is debated, but the most widely accepted theory is that it goes back to an ancient Iranian term. Or perhaps Warbat, which means something like friend or ally. And it was adopted by the southern Slavic peoples who formed the Croatian group. I have a Georgian friend who, when he asks, "Where are you from?" people answer, "I'm going to the United States soon. No." The southern state of the United States, one of the former 13 British colonies, was named in honor of King George VI. But this matters to us as much as Trump cares about maintaining the free market. Because today we're focusing on the country in the Caucasus, namesake of this United States state, in Spanish. But just by coincidence. The most widely accepted theory is that during the Middle Ages, Christian chroniclers from the Near East and Europe associated the Georgians, a people from the South Caucasus, older than the Tigris of the East, with Saint George, who was their national patron according to Christian tradition. In fact, their flag has the cross of Saint George, just like England's, which also has him as its patron. However, the Georgians call their country Zakarbelo. This term comes from Kartli, a historic central region of Georgia, which was the core of the ancient kingdom of Iberia, the first Georgian state. And it also has nothing to do with the Iberian Peninsula. Sorry for confusing you so much in this section. The suffix velo means land of, so Sakarvelo would mean the land of Kartli, referencing the ancient history of this people who still resist invaders today. Isn't that right, Putin? Hello? It's our turn to talk about the land of the rising sun, the poetic nickname for Japan, but actually, it has a literal meaning. Since the Japanese, in their language, call their country Nippon Koku, which means the country of the origin of the sun. Yes, and that's why in Spanish we also use the demonym Nippon. As for the name Japan, used in most Western languages, it comes after several indirect and phonetic transformations passing through southern Chinese dialects. Malay, which adopted that name in its own way, and Portuguese, which conquered part of Malaysia. A curious fact, and maybe you already know it. In the West, we started using this name since the Portuguese arrival in Asia, that is, during the Modern Age. During the Middle Ages, it was known as Cipango, a name written in the memoirs of the famous Venetian explorer Marco Polo, who never visited the country. This toponym comes from certain Chinese dialects, where they call the island Yipangu. Another country as ancient as Methuselah is Armenia, the first country to adopt Christianity as its official religion. And in the national language, it is known as Hayastan. A name without much mystery. It comes from Haik, a legendary warrior who fought against the Babylonians, defending his people, and who founded the Armenian homeland. A typical case of a mythological eponym like Rome, which comes from the brothers Romulus and Remus. That is, Hayastan is the land of Haik. As for the name used in Western languages, Armenia already appears in Assyrian sources from the 6th century before Christ. As Armenia, the same name used by the Persians and later by the Greeks and Romans. This toponym is indeed ambiguous and could be associated with an ancient tribe called Armin, which settled at Lake Ban. Today it's Turkey, but in its time it was inhabited by Armenians before the genocide. Yes, the one that Erdogan refuses to acknowledge. Egypt is another place name for which we have to dig deep into history. You probably already know that ancient Egypt of the pharaohs has little to do with the Arab and Muslim Egypt we know today, beyond the name and the geographical location. The name we use in Western languages comes from the ancient Greek Aegyptos, which is the Greek adaptation that could mean the land of Ptah, the Egyptian god, inventor of masonry, the Greek version of Hephaestus. Although it is not very well known, Ptah was the deity of the city of Memphis, which was the capital of the Old Kingdom of Egypt. By the way, the pharaohs did not call themselves that either, but rather Kemet, which in their language meant the Black Land. Yes, countries have been inventing names for other countries since time immemorial. As for present-day Egypt, the country of Nasr is known in Arabic as Misr. The origin of this word is Semitic, and it appears in ancient biblical or Mesopotamian texts. It is linked to Misraim, Noah's grandson from the flood, who is seen as the Egyptians' patriarch. In classical Arabic, the name Mis is also used to mean fortified city and was applied to Egypt because of its historical status within the Islamic world. I always say that if we're talking about inclusion, we should look more at New Zealand than at inclusive language. It's a country that accepts same-sex marriage. Sign language has official status to include deaf-mute people as well as Maori, the national indigenous language. In fact, the Maori have broad political participation, and even the country's governor-general has Maori ancestry. For this reason, the name Aotearoa is also official in the country and literally means the land of the Great White Cloud. According to tradition, the first Maori who arrived from the Pacific saw a great cloud on the horizon, a sign of land which guided them to settle the islands. In fact, by the way, it is one of the largest territories to be populated the latest, since the Maori are believed to have arrived in New Zealand around 1250 AD. The Europeans arrived a few centuries later, and it wasn't the British who came first, but the Dutch, led by the expedition of Abel Tasman. The navigator named the land New Zealand in honor of the Dutch province of Zeeland, which still exists to this day. The name was later anglicized by the British as Zealand. Today, both place names have official status. As you can see, toponymy has a lot of interesting facts to tell us. And behind every name we use and stop using, there are several amazing stories. If this video reaches 50,000 views, I'll make a second part, which I've put aside. We've renamed many countries in Spanish our own way. Which other one do you know? Which one from this list did you find the most intriguing?